feel like Kobe in the fourth quarter.
This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast. We're brought to you by Prize Picks, coming at you Wednesday morning. It's January 15th, and because the Wolves play their 40th game of the season this evening, we're going to use this episode to take stock of where the Wolves are at, I guess, at the halfway point of the season. Chris Finch, over his time here, has said he likes to kind of look at the season in 4 20-game chunks, chapters, increments, however you want to put it. So Britt and I, over the past few years, have often got together around the 20, 40, 60 game mark to do one of these and just kind of check in, look at some numbers. I remember, Britt, when we did this, whatever, that was 20 games ago, we were kind of comparing what the Wolves looked like on the first 20 games of the season through all of last season. And there was, and I remember one thing that really stood out about it was like the offense is kind of the same, or it was kind of the same the first 20 games of this season to the 82 the season prior. So what I've done here is, I mean, I don't have like a ton of numbers or anything, but as a place to just get us talking about this team at the halfway point, you'll want to look at games. What I have in front of me is 21 through 39 again, because the 40th is tonight, but kind of look at some of those numbers, see what's happened in chapter 2 of the season, as a way to talk about everything that's gone on in chapter 2 of this season. But yeah, how's that sound to you?
It sounds good. It was, I think, 10-10 versus 16-4 the year before. In the first 20 games. So that was the big, and then this time, I think so far they're 11-8 if they were 10-10 because they're 21-18. So
yeah, I could just give them to you. So first 20 games of the season, the Wolves were 10-10. They ranked 20th on offense and 7th on defense. Overall, net, they were 12th in point differential, again, for the first 20 games of the season. What they are now in games 21 through 39, this last, what would that be? It's
18 games,
19 games,
19
but
games,
December 4th through today, January 15th. So that's 7 weeks. In that time, they're 11-8, and they are 22nd on offense in that chunk of time, and 2nd on defense. Again, a positive point differential, actually the 9th best point differential in the league over that course of time. I have some stuff beneath those numbers, but what stands out to you there, just right off the cuff, where the offense is slightly worse in these most recent 20 games than it was the first 20, and the defense actually being a good chunk better, jumping from 7th to 2nd in this chunk.
I think, and I felt this way, I felt this way all season, of course, but the defensive identity is the key to this team going as far as they can go. You have to be somewhat elite in something if you were going to be getting in beyond the first round of the playoffs. It just is a fact. You can have great balance, but that balance itself has to be, if not top 5, top 10, and usually top 5 if you want to keep going. But having at least one side of the ball where you're very, very good, and therefore you kind of send a message to yourself as a team. This is who we are. This is what we do. It's this way in all sports, quite frankly. Some baseball teams, great pitching, football teams, great line or great defense, whatever. You mark yourself by what you do best if you are a good team. And this team, since the arrival of Rudy Gobert, has had to basically prioritize itself as a great defensive team. Last year they were. This year, they were making steps toward that with the reintegration of a new system. And now at 2nd, only to Oklahoma City, who's having almost a legendarily great defense. I think that the defense has been fantastic. I find it interesting at the other side of the ball that the offense has changed a great deal in terms of how it scores and yet remains inefficient.
Yeah, equally inefficient. I mean, it was first 20 games of the season, 113.3 offensive rating. And then in the second chunk, it's a 112 offensive rating, which is 22nd. So again, that's not how it's moved with it. First 20, 20th overall, second 20, 22nd overall. So, would you want to start focusing on one side of the ball? Do you have a preference? One of those sound more interesting?
Well, I think what's interesting about the offense is that the downward trend is like a 3-year trend. It's I think they were 12th or whatever it was. Every year they've been going down. They've stair-stepped down, and the stair steps are down first 20 games to this 20 games. And what's crazy is, look at this roster. It has firepower. I mean, Anthony Edwards, Julius Randle, Dante DiVincenzo, Mike Conley, theoretically. You have the makings of a really interesting offensive team. And at this point in time, you have to lay it a little bit on the coach. You have to lay it a little bit on the 2 stars that they're now, you have to lay it on the fact that Gobert, I think, has fallen off some on offense in terms of both the trust of his teammates and what he is able to do in terms of finishing. I do think he remains a way above average screener and a much more willing ball mover. So I don't think it's all on him, but I do think that they are still not getting the most out of their components. And, I find that interesting. I also find that the low-hanging fruit of transition is never seized upon.
That was funny. I listened back to a chunk of when we were talking about the first 20 games of the season, and I asked Finch about the 20, and it was like, yep, the transition defense in this next chapter, transition offense, getting out and running more, and they are still 29th in getting out.
It's incredible, right? And when you ask him, I think a question I asked him about quick decision making has been a hallmark of your philosophy for now 3 years. And the quick decision making remains elusive. Why is that? And he said, well, some people are wired differently. That's just another way of saying Ant and Randall are ball holders to some extent, especially Ant. Randall's actually gotten better at it lately. But he's the straw that stirs the drink, whatever cliche you want to use. He's the guy. And his personality, his offensive personality, is the personality of the team. And in that respect, he's a lot like Kevin Durant, who is himself a legendary scorer. And yet the philosophy that Kevin Durant just naturally, organically puts through his team has not been a successful one for the team.
Let me go through some specifics of the offensive numbers. Okay. So they go from 20th to 22nd. So question is, what's gotten worse? Right. They're shooting slightly worse in the first 20 games. They're 12th in effective field goal percentage, 16th in the second 20. It's not a huge dip, but if I would have bet 20 games ago, I would have bet it was going to get better, offensively, because a lot of the reasons and rationale behind the slow start to the season was acclimating, and I thought particularly from an offensive standpoint where it was feeling a lot like you go Ant, you go Randall, what even is the pecking order. So it is a little bit alarming to me that they're shooting worse over this chunk of time. They're also turning it over slightly more. First 20 games, they're turning it over at the 8th highest clip in the league. This last 20 game stretch, it's been the 7th highest clip in the league. And they are also getting to the free throw line less in this last 20 games. 11th most, 11th in free throw rate the first 20 games, 22nd in free throw rate this second 20 games, which is the biggest shifter. I'm going through the 4 factors here, right?
Yeah, sure.
Effective field goal percentage, turnover percentage, free throw rate. So shooting and turning it over slightly more, getting to the free throw line less. And then the one area they've improved in is they are offensive rebounding it at a higher clip. They were 18th first 20, 10th second 20. You would think with an uptick in offensive rebounding like that, first thing my head goes to is like, okay, Gobert is finding himself a way to be involved and productive in the offense. Go into my memory, he wasn't doing that earlier in the season. So you go, okay, cool. So he's doing the offensive rebounding thing. But then I look at the rest of this. What else is, what's leading to worse shooting? What's leading to more turning it over? And what's leading to getting to the free throw line less? I don't know. It's pretty circle all that for me. And it's Ant and the way he's being covered and his ability and or inability to sort of solve those puzzles night to night, I think is the biggest factor in that. And obviously that's something we've been talking about all season.
Yeah. What is interesting to me about that is that his synergy with his teammates has not been as strong as it's been when he's been rolling. The classic game of that was the 53-point game that they lost, of course. But I do see, let's just call it as it is. There are some games where Ant just plays badly, not only in terms of like the mechanics of putting the ball in the basket, but his decision-making and his focus are not there. Mm-hmm. And the last game against the Wizards, surprise, surprise, that was the worst 40-point plus game I've ever seen a player have. He got 41 and 8 and 9 or something, and it was awful. One could argue that the Wizards are, they're 30th in offensive rating, 30th in defensive rating. They were going to win the game if they showed a pulse at all. They showed a pulse for like 12 minutes, and they won by 15 or something.
But it was a pulse that only Ant was able to give them.
And also,
I get where you're going at with all that.
Right,
I didn't.
Right.
It was not an aesthetically pleasing 40-point game, and I was kind of putting in my notes a lot during the time too of like, oh, what is Ant doing here? What is Ant doing there? But I do remember, I'll let you keep going, but I do remember getting to the second half of the game and being like, hey, if it weren't for these offensive boomlets from Ant that are coming every 7 or 8 minutes and flanked by bad defense on the other side or lethargic sort of carrying, like they would have lost the game without Ant's sheer offensive force there too. But I agree. It's not like, I'm not giving that a gold star game, even if the box score screamed it.
And also, basketball is such a team game. And if you're reliant on one guy to do all the work, that is in part a failure of the coaching staff and in part a failure of the one guy doing all the scoring. I think that Ant's turnovers many of them were ridiculous. They were a result of clear inattention. Mm-hmm. They were a result of not thinking as he was throwing the ball. He was mechanical rather than alert. He was not playing with a court awareness of other people on the court with him. This is year 5. Those 7 or 8 turnovers he had just goes to show you.
Yeah.
In the first quarter, he tried 3 mid-range jumpers in the first quarter against a terrible team. There was not a better shot than a mid-range against the worst defense in the NBA.
Well,
and he missed 2 of the 3.
Yep. So I think part of that is, how do you get a mid-range jumper, right? If you're the primary initiator, normally the opponent.
You wake up and roll out of bed. That's how you get a mid-range jumper.
But you do it against drop coverage. He can't go and, like, if they come up today and put 2 on the ball on him, he can't just like, or it's very hard to go like split that and then all of a sudden stop and take an 18-footer. What was happening in the Wizards game is they were playing drop coverage against him, and they're giving him that look there, where rather than what he's seen so much of over particularly the last few weeks is a double on the ball right away. They felt like, I would assume the Wizards didn't feel like they could execute that, right? Because it's a complicated coverage. We know that you double, you got to rotate behind. And so I'm actually trying to help you make your point here. It's a lack of awareness on Ant's point of like what they're doing. And he even said in the post-game interview, is like, took me a while to realize they weren't double teaming me. So sorry, that's the reason I bring that up. I'm still with you, is that like the the best shot for Ant to be doing? No, I think he literally fell into what Washington wanted him to do when he was initiating the offense. That's my point.
Right. And I guess my greater point is ball movement will destroy drop coverage.
Sure.
And so will good 3-point shooting. And, it was annoying to me. Put it this way. The Memphis game was a loss. The Wizards game was a win. They played 50 times better against Memphis than they played. I mean, we've got to get out of this whole idea of, a win's a win or whatever. This team a year ago had traction 90% of the time. If the score was close, most of the time the other team was playing very well. And it was an intention. They said we lost a lot of games to bad teams the previous year. We will not do that this year. Yep. And they followed through on that. This team has not had traction against good opponents and bad opponents. They have not thought about, how many times has Fitch gone into the postgame? Well, turnovers was the one thing we couldn't do, and we did it all the time. Offensive rebounding. We preached offensive rebound. I mean, one of the things, to get back to the theme, that has not changed from 1 to 20, 21 to 39 is the idea of who you are and what you need to be in order to be a legitimate championship contender. That's the reason you have the second highest payroll in the NBA. That is the reason why, things were stocked. It's why you're playing 8 people instead of many kids. I mean, you are going for it theoretically, and yet you are not, as a team, providing the mindset and the structure, which is also on the coaching, to go for it. And so, I get why fans are disgruntled by that. And I think that I don't think it helps to have, Ant celebrated for a game against the worst team in basketball, where he's basically flexing and chatting with all the fans from DC and everything. His team is not progressing in ways that will matter as we get into February and March, and then the postseason, if they manage to make it past the play-in, or if they manage to be in the first round against a better opponent. Both of scenarios look very likely right now that will be the scenario that they have. So I don't understand why somebody who has had such a great attitude, who said in Denver, when people were saying, you don't consider yourself a great player, why not? He said, because I haven't won a playoff series. Well, and then said, I was ground down by the season. I'll come in better shape. All of this stuff. It is a marathon. It is a marathon of preparation and steadfast attitude that we're not seeing. And so since we have this macro look, we have this 20-game look rather than, game by game, I just feel like if you're looking at this team from a macro perspective, what I see is a team that remains a relatively unserious team, a team that has not been able to figure out how to lock in, not only when it's 2-point game against a good team or something, but when you're playing a Wizards team and you have the ability to blow them out and have everybody sit in the middle of the third quarter and get those kids off the bench playing, and you guys just sit around and relax and have fun.
Like the Thunder did the night before. Yeah.
Exactly. And the night before was a back-to-back. Right. It just, anyway.
And let me just say again, to echo you and be with you, of like, it is not improving. And the numbers, again, bear that out. They're shooting worse over the course of the season. They're turning it over more over the course of the season. and they're getting to the free throw line less over the course of the season. The area their offense has improved thus far this year is offensive rebounding. That's
Right.
so.
And 3-point efficiency.
They're both have been a really good 3-point shooting team in both quarters of the season.
Right.
Let me grab our first break here.
Okay.
Let's talk some defense. Today's show is brought to you by Falling Knife Brewing Company, and a lot of stuff going on there. I have this up on the YouTube screen, but if you want to follow Falling Knife on Instagram, it's Falling Knife BC. And one thing that's just really helpful with that is they post a schedule for the week every week of just kind of what their events are. You'll see the Wolves games on there this week on Monday, the Vikings game going on there as well. They have Wolves games going on, like tonight it's 8:30, Wolves Warriors. But they also have like trivia a lot at times on days there aren't games, or some just throughout the course of the week. Like tonight there's Trivia Mafia there from 7:30 to 8:30. Then the Wolves game is at 8:30. On Thursday, they're doing the initials game, which a lot of you know from K-Fan. They do that on Thursdays at 7:30. This Friday, it's Wolves Knicks. It'd be a pretty awesome time, I think, to get together with Wolves fans and watch that game. Wolves Cavs on Saturday, and then also Sunday they have 90s themed trivia at 5 p.m. I do really recommend going there and watching a game with other Wolves fans, but I also get, if that's not your thing, you watch the games at home, or if you go to Target Center to watch them. But Falling Knife can also be a place for you on the off nights of the week. It's a fun brewery. It's good people. And we always want to keep them on your radar. Also, if you're doing Dry January this month, they have added cocktails and promotions that are NA cocktails or THC infused beverages. So a lot going on there with Falling Knife. Always be thinking about them for a Wolves game. Today's show is also brought to you by Prize Picks. And whereas I was looking quick at some of the options from Wolves Warriors tonight, Rudy Gobert's rebound number is only at 10.5. Warriors are really small right now. The Wolves seem to play Rudy through small lineups there. I really like the idea that Rudy Gobert is going to have more than 10.5 rebounds in this game. And then thinking back to some of the other Warriors games, Golden State's plan has been somebody else do something, and then we'll relent on how hard we're guarding Anthony Edwards. So I'm going to go to the first suspect there, which is Julius Randle. A lot of shots, which means theoretically means a lot of points. I'll say he has more than 18.5 points. And then, if you want to do a full lineup, you got to get guys from separate teams. So I just went through and I kind of randomly clicked on this, but I think Andrew Wiggins probably gets a block in this game. I could throw that one on there too. I wanted to put 3 on there to show you that there's a protected play going on today. So if you make this $15 lineup, you can use the protected play promotion right there. If you lose your $15 wager, it goes back into your account. It's a protected play. If it hits, if all 3 of these things hit, put 15 on it. That's 75. So it's a fun thing to do. And I think, for Wolves games, if you're watching, bet $5. The only reason I said 15 there is because there's a $15 protected play if you want. But if you want to do $5 and have your $5 protected, that's cool too. This is not meant to be something that is a get rich fast thing or get poor fast thing either. This is a fun something to do and kind of have on the line. I know I do. I'm sending screenshots of my lineups. My friend's sending it to me too. I think it's a fun thing to do. And you watch the Wolves, you listen to the show, like, should be able to have a pretty good idea of how this stuff is going. So prizepicks.com, as always, PrizePicks app. Use the promo code Dane. And it's your first time creating an account. You'll be accredited $50 into your account when you place your first lineup. All right, Britt. Let's go to the defensive side of the ball.
Right. Much more positive outlook there.
Yeah. It's I guess much more like last season. Again, they started the year, which I do think, and I think we were pretty complimentary in the first 20 games of the season, that they were a top 10 defense, even after making, the cat change. They were 7th for those first 20 games. And a real place of growth has been on the defensive side of the ball. I think there's a lot of different things we can point to: comfort levels, Randall figuring out where he fits, what he needs to do defensively. We can get into that stuff, but yeah, it's no joke to be the number 2 defense in the NBA from December 4th to January 15th. And the only team ahead of them in that time is the Oklahoma City Thunder, who are freakish defensively right now. So I can get into some numbers there, but just your overall maybe feel on what feels like has come together defensively for this team?
I think that the second unit, particularly the front court of Nas and Randall, really showed dramatic improvement. I think it had begun a little bit in the end of that 20-game thing, but I just think that they began to fly around a little bit more. And I think even more importantly, Randall began, when they did do assignments and less switching and everything, Randall would take the big. For the beginning of the season, a lot of the times Nas was taking the big. It never made sense. You and I talked about it. We both thought 250 pounds, the way Randall plays offense, it's very clear that contact is something he both understands and welcomes. And that has been demonstrated when he's been playing defense. He will challenge guys who usually thrive when challenged. And I'm not saying he wins most of those battles, but he enjoys the battle in a way that really provides sustenance to this defense, that the Wolves aren't getting steamrolled in the paint anymore as frequently. In fact, Rudy has gotten steamrolled in the paint more than Randall has in the last 20 games, in my opinion. So I really think that
that's like post-up situations, right? Just
yeah. I mean, most of it is, but it's guys like Zion and Davis. It's guys that are, who are making a living, eating people up in the paint. And I think Randall is a more formidable meal than, most people would have given him credit for, certainly in the beginning of the season. And what that has done is it's enabled Nas to be the fly around defender that he is best at. I mean, I would say 50% of his blocks minimum have come from behind. Sometimes he's kind of like what Jaden was his first couple of years. He enjoys guys thinking they've got him beat off the dribble and then blocks the shot off the glass or something. That's kind of become a stealth Nas signature on defense. And so you've got a front court that doesn't have Rudy Gobert in it, and you've got guys that are really responding to their role. And then now I understand that, DDV is now in the starting lineup. For a while there, you had, DiVincenzo, Na, and, Ant sometimes, other, whatever the fifth person was. But that second unit suddenly, especially against second unit personnel on the other side, was a very, very formidable defense. And if you recall, the drop-off when Rudy left the game in the first 15 games or so anyway was stark. And we were wondering, this team needs a backup center, or whatever, and now, Julius Randle is a pretty good backup center. And so I think that is one of the main reasons for
it. Just on that part, I'm still into let's let that flower bloom even more. Put Randall on, even when he's out there with Rudy in the starting lineup. I personally,
we don't know how happy or unhappy he is about it. I mean, I think there's a reason for the initial reluctance. Maybe Finch and Randall had talked, and Finch, and Randall was kind of saying, well, and now it's become something where, and that may be one of the ways when Finch says we've asked him to do so many things. Maybe one of the things they've asked him to do is bang bodies with people who, are inevitably going to make him look bad because they're elite.
Yeah, I don't know, and I would say that what Britt's saying there is we've asked Julius to do all these different things, and he's been embracing some they've taken some time, but he's embraced different tasks. But it would make sense from a coaching standpoint of hey, we can only give you A, B, and C. We can't give you A, B, C, D, E, and F and expect you to do all of them. We'll just give you A, B, and C. Maybe you'll do the majority of it there, because what I was thinking at the beginning of that there was okay, well, what do you mean he doesn't want to guard centers? If you're the coach, that's imperative on you to explain why that's the best thing to do, if it is in fact the best thing to do. But I think you explained that away pretty well. Let me just go through why they've gotten better defensively. Okay. Again, 7th in defense the first 20 games, 2nd in defense the next 20 games. What's gotten better is they are fouling less. 2nd lowest foul rate in the NBA these last 20 games after being 10th least. That's something they've always done. That's something Rudy is really good at, is defending at a high level without fouling. That's improved over the course of the season. This one was a little scary. Opponents are shooting substantially worse. The 12th worst to now their second worst is just overall effective field goal percentage, which got my head thinking like, okay, maybe, you're getting some good 3-point shooting luck, right, against it. And that's driving it down. That's honestly what it often is when there's a stark shift in it. But 35%, allowing 35% made threes in the first 20 games, allowing 35% made threes in the second 20 games. So this is pretty real. The change in where they're defending at a higher clip is at the rim, and it's at that floater range. Again, another Rudy thing, right? Like they're the Rudy ness is permeating, right? And it that's kind of something that's sunk in over these second 20 games.
And can I put in just one thing about that?
Yep.
I think Jaden McDaniels has made a huge stride in the last 20 games. I think his defense was first of all, he went into his usual foul trouble funk in October, November. And then secondly, he was just in general, he was bad at both ends of the court. And defensively now, I think that has improved. I also think, again, a real minor tweak that has happened with the coaching staff. I'm going to rip them for their offense. I want to praise them for their defense. Jaden is not always on the ball now. And that was, again, something that we thought that would be a really good thing for the defense. To, one, just give him some breaks, and two, to help his rebounding, and three, sometimes Na or DiVincenzo is the better assignment against those guys. And I think that has been filtered into the rotation mix. And so I think that's another reason why the 2-point shooting has not been as efficient as it was early.
That staying connected, that the rear view contest, just the not letting things be really open, not letting remember the beginning of the season, the Toronto game. I always think of the Toronto game. It was just like straight line drives to the basket, and Rudy's like, "Where do you want me? You want me up here? You want me back here?" And
that was the Rudy Randall Nader right there, boy.
Yeah, but it was both the nadir and the turning point, I think, defensively, which is actually an encouraging thing. That like the day that you all got in a fight or were pissy with each other, it was points to being a turning point of the season defensively. That's I think that's big, because if you lose Rudy or you don't continue to embrace Rudy, and Rudy's still on the team craters. That's just
you don't have a defensive identity anymore.
Exactly. A couple of things, despite how good the defense has been, have gotten worse in this chunk of time. They are forcing slightly fewer turnovers. They were 10th down to 12th. I don't know. You could have, but I, again, maybe would have bet on that going up. They were a high turnover generation team the season before. Maybe they're a little bit more middle of the pack than I anticipated. But the real thing that's gotten actually a lot worse is the defensive rebounding. 9th before 21st. That's crazy. They're a bottom 10 defensive rebounding team in these last 20 games, but second in overall defensive rating. That suggests to me, well, you probably lost a handful of games by giving up a bunch of offensive rebounds. Check. That's true. But it also signals that, like, that's some meat on the bone, some low-hanging fruit, whatever. Like, if this team can rebound, they're going to be even better defensively.
But what happened when this team had the Vando Pat Bev fly around defense that year when they went 46 and 36 or whatever? Everybody bemoaned the fact that they couldn't get defensive rebounds. Well, part of it is, if you're flying around, there are all kinds of seams for people to crash for offensive rebounds. And you yourself, if you're flying around, it means you're contesting. If you're low man help, it means, it's
a lot different than just like turn, seal, box out, rebound,
exactly. If you're in drop coverage, or if you're basically playing your man with very, very little switching, then you basically say, all right, you're going to be boxing out. You're going to have people in the paint ready to get the ball. If they're only allowing 35% on threes, that's a lot of long rebounds. This team has chronically, whether it was a Pat Bev style defense or last year's defense, have not done well. DiVincenzo is fantastic at it. But McLaughlin was last year. They usually have one or two guys. Conley's pretty good at it. But chasing down loose rebounds, I mean, Nas, as quick as he is surprisingly terrible at it. And,
He's got like falling over.
And obviously Rudy, and Randall both aren't really good at it. So if the rebound doesn't carry him way out to the backcourt, but it goes over the head of like the people in the paint, I think the Wolves lose a lot of those rebounds.
Mm-hmm. And that's an area that, like, if you could just give Ant 10% more care factor,
yeah.
it would make a world of difference, because those are the ones. That's the shot goes up, I'm defending on the wing, I move in to the nail like it's a free throw, right? Like it's a pattern. Like watch Nikhil tonight. He will do that. He'll be out on the perimeter. He'll see a shot goes up. He like it's like a drill. You go in and you have your toe touch the nail, and then you go and get the defensive rebound. Ant doesn't do that. Dante does do that. Julius doesn't do that, though. I think he's been rebounding a little bit better, but they need. I mean, I know it doesn't sound fun, but you do need to be more technically sound, to get these things. And those are the areas that Ant doesn't
and Jim Pete, who, by the way, shout out to Jim Peterson, who I think is having a fantastic year. The times I speed through a lot of the games I've already seen on home games, but the away games, where I'm watching in between the plays and everything, and he's pointing stuff out. He has mentioned that Randall releases at inopportune times too frequently, and I co-sign that to the best I can see it. See, a lot of times he can see it, the camera isn't seeing it on these away games, so I don't see it. But I have seen it in home games too, occasionally, where he just wants to cherry pick. And as Finch pointed out in the interview we had with me in reference to Jaden McDaniels, sometimes that's a good idea, depending on who you're guarding and where it is.
And it gets you out in transition a little bit, which we were just bemoaning them not getting out in transition some. So, I mean, But if you're terrible in transition, you're terrible in defensive rebounding, then you're not getting either side of that equation. You lean into one and get it, or at least be adequate at one of them, and they're not. So and that's kind of the thing. It's like where the Lego pieces for this team like should click in together. They don't, even in some of the areas that they're good at. Again, defensively, like it's a good defensive team. You're forcing tough shots. You're forcing a lot of misses. You're not doing a good job of corralling those misses, even though you're not a small team, right? You're not a team that lacks physicality. You're just not wanting to do it to the degree that they have to be the best defensive team in the league. And it feels that they need to be the best defensive team in the league to be winning more than half of their games until they figure out this offensive stuff, which, as you coined it, has been a stair stepper down progressively. It's harder. It's harder for me to see how this offense gets progressively better. The defensive stuff is low hanging fruit, and it's effort, and it's execution. It's effort and execution of your two highest scorers, your two highest usage offensive players. And I get some of that, but I don't know if those guys do better. Maybe you have Ant guard the ball less. Like, why was he guarding Ja Morant at the Grizzlies? I don't really get that. I think Ant is miserably overrated as a defender overall, unless it's just guarding overall, one on one. But it's these are the things that aren't lining up perfectly, and that's why they're kind of at where they're at defensively.
One of the things I would say about the offense is that if DiVincenzo, that starting lineup switch, if DiVincenzo and Connolly can promote their virtues and tamp down their vices, that has the makings of a really good. DiVincenzo has been an elixir for pace, which is very important for this team. But his turnovers are hurtful. If he can continue to lead this team on offense, step on the gas a little bit, work with Randall, do what he's been doing, and limit the turnovers, That's a big if, because we don't know if that's going to happen. But that's one aspect. And then Conley is still searching for his mix of when to run the offense, when to be the safety valve shooter. Right. I think he's gotten a lot better since he's playing with more simpatico personnel. I think that the switch in general has just meant that it's conferred upon him that he can take whatever role he wants, and so he can begin to be a little bit more assertive. Now the question becomes, now we really do find out, has Conley taken a step back? Because that excuse is no longer there for him. I do find that on balance, he is doing the kinds of things I expected him to do, and he is improving the team in important ways. But there's evidence both in his two-point shooting and occasionally in his defense that indicates that he's not the Mike Conley that we remember from the previous year and a half he was here.
Yes, would definitely, co-sign that. And that's been an adjustment, over the course of the season. I think it's led to slower changes to the starting lineup than anticipated. It's led to, I think it's led to confusion on Finch's part, and I think actually understandable of like,
right.
I get why he was like, oh, Mike's just starting the season slow, given how important, even if he was just trying to wish that, because like people don't know how important Mike Conley was, I think, still to last season, or at least in Finch's purview, particularly when you lose Kyle Anderson, who is another kind of
those were his two rocks. Those were the two people that were the foundation of, because let's face it, it's an excitable team. And Cat for Randall, I mean, how many people are more excitable than Cat? Very, very few. But Randall's close to it. He's in the mix, And so that you didn't really gain level-headedness and quietude in your offense by switching one from the other. And so Conley has become more important, and it's not clear yet. I remain, for the record, a Conley believer. I do think that even if he's not 100% of the player who was last year, I believe he can be 75 to 80% of the player who was last year. So far, he's been about 60 or 50, and that's a big difference. So I do think that seeing what happens as he continues to work his way through, I love it when he's out there with Na, because Na reveres him. And so
kind of lets him be him too,
and you have that, and you also have that identity thing where Na didn't get to play with Conley enough last year, and he was mentoring instead. And it's just a good combination. And have DiVincenzo out there with the first unit. I mean, they're 4-1, and they're not 4-1 because their offense is vastly improved, but it is a hopeful change, I think, simply because you had to break up. Conley could not organize an offense, and if Conley can't organize an offense, then Gobert is marginalized. DiVincenzo seems to be able to feed Randall, and Randall seems more willing to become more of a ball sharer, and that was started before DiVincenzo got into the starting lineup, but it's definitely increased now. So I think there is some upside hope. I do think that if we're going to get into coaching decisions and we're going to get into like hot button issues, Na's closing on occasion is certainly a way to improve your offense. It's a risk because Nas has not proven to himself to be a high pressure, high leverage minutes performer. His clutch play in the postseason and in clutch minutes here have not been good. But I think before contract time, and I think he should be signed regardless of what the number is, but I think that this team needs to figure out, can Nas be a guy who is out there on the floor doing Nas Reed things in a 2-point game rather than a 10-point game?
That kind of brings me to what I'm kind of thinking about in chapter 3 here of the season, which is, so trade deadline is after the 56th game of the season. So they got 17 more from today to play here before you have to make a decision on how or if you are going to change your roster at all. And obviously the biggest name that will be going around is related to what you were just saying about Nas is Julius Randle, right? And I think it's interesting how you frame that there of like, which this is just true, is if you did just delete Julius or you traded him, you got something else back. And one of your primary motivations is moving Nas into that primary role. Now he's playing 30 every night, and theoretically everything pours down and it's all wonderful,
right?
But he does not historically have a strong track record of closing or doing, and when he has gotten the opportunity, whatever, he hasn't closed at a high level. There haven't been that many opportunities though, so we can we can talk about it. I mean, how are you thinking about what they can learn over these last 17 games? Are you still open-minded, to learning, and what are you looking for if you put your Tim Conley hat on of like, what do I not need to see in these next 15 or so basketball games? What do I want to better understand, I guess is the way to put it, before the trade deadline comes around?
Well, this brings up the frame that is always in the way, which is, are you splitting the difference between championship or bust and development for the mid-future, or are you trying to play, or are you want to lean into one or the other? I myself think that the Wolves ought to close with hot hands and let that be. And by hot hands, I don't mean necessarily somebody shooting lights out. I mean winning lineup combinations. I mean, if a team is beating the opponents, especially if the opponents have their best five, their theoretical closing five on the court, then there's no reason that this team, it's good for development in the future. It's good for the present as well, to figure out your best. And if Naz Reid can't break that nexus on that basis, if he cannot be one of the guys that Finch could regularly go to because he's been really good prior and it works if he stays in there, then his number is not as high. Then, when you go to sign him, and I think it's a foregone conclusion, you don't trade Karl Anthony Towns unless your plan is to sign Naz Reid. I mean, otherwise it really is the height of idiocy. I mean, because otherwise you've blown the timeline with Ant, or you basically taken away one of the theoretical pillars of the Ant timeline. You've got a 6 man of the year, multi-purpose guy who's done everything he's been asked to do, has not complained about not starting, has not complained about anything, was thrown into the center role as a second unit this year after coming in with a small forward's body. The guy deserves consideration for what he has done, but also, by the same token, that consideration is that he should get paid. Now the question becomes how much. And one of the ways you find out how much is, can Naz earn his way into high leverage minutes? And the only way that can happen is if you provide a context by which he can earn his way into high leverage minutes. And that means stellar play in medium leverage minutes with people who are going to be on the court. And so there has already been some lineup flux. That needs to continue. Naz needs windows. They don't have to be huge windows. They don't have to be the windows that Cat or Randall now is getting, in that you have to be shitting the bed to not play. It just has to be that if you're playing well and your rotation, you're rested with 4 or 5 minutes to go in the game and you've played really well, let it roll.
Yeah, first of all, I think you put that really well. That frames it. It is interesting that he's been asked to do so many different things. Like you said, you listed him off there. Like the one thing he hasn't been asked to do is be a starter and play 30 minutes. I mean, he kind of like the last, even once Carl got hurt, they were starting Kyle Anderson last year. And eventually they did move to Naz, and that would be the one time we could point to. Naz was asked to do this, and he did what? Oh, he was successful in that role, and it pushed them into the, kept them afloat, even though Cat was out. You could point to that. It would be like the hypothetical scenario, which you just said makes no sense, and I would agree with that, but I think this is within the realm of possibilities, is you don't trade Julius Randle, Naz Reid never starts, and then he leaves in free agency. And that would be kind of crazy in that you never even tried him genuinely in that role at the 4, which made sense when you had Cat, but that you never even, if it's 3 more weeks from now and you've never given that at all really an earnest try, and he's stayed clearly in the pecking order behind Julius Randle, and then you just let him go. Like, why would that be a path that you would go down? It doesn't make sense, because he's the younger player, for future development purposes. Like, and
he also fits.
Yeah, and the alternative is
everybody. I mean, there are people, surprising. I mean, he hasn't fit well with McDaniels this year, I think, but nobody has to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
But Naz and Gobert on the court, and Naz and Randle for that matter. See, there it is again.
Yeah,
it is. What is fascinating about it is that Naz does work well in a variety of situations, especially if he's given a little time, not nearly as much time as Cat Rudy or Rudy Randle. Then the question becomes, it's always chicken or the egg kind of thing, where somebody says, well, he's got all this great stuff because we've used him well. Well, he is a great Swiss Army knife, but it comes time when maybe the 1 or 2 things on that Swiss Army knife are the ones you want to pull out most often, and you don't care about the other things. You want this guy to be your starting 4 in a fly around lineup that works well,
That's playing a 2025 version of basketball. You could see Naz Reid functioning on the Cleveland Cavaliers. That's why they tried to sign him 2 years ago. You could see Naz Reid functioning on the Celtics and in the way that they play. You could see it. You could see it on OKC. Absolutely. And like the biggest pushback I get when I'm just talking about this of like Julius, versus Naz, is it's like, well, why do you think Naz Reid is going to be better than Julius Randle, who's been an all-NBA player, been an all-star level player? Do you think Naz Reid is an all-NBA player or an all-star level player? No, I do not think Naz Reid is an all-star caliber player. What I feel like I know pretty damn well with both Julius Randle and Rudy Gobert is their days of being all-NBA players and all-stars are behind them. And part of it isn't that I think either of them are much worse than they were 3 years ago when they were making all-NBA. The game is changing. The game is changing, you guys. The way Julius Randle plays can be a good, effective innings eater. It is never, that style of play is never going to be in the top 15 players in the NBA and put him on a all NBA team anymore. It's not. This game is being efficiencyed out. Like the Cavs and the Thunder and the Celtics score 1.2 points per possession. Think about that. That's a 60% 2-point shot or that is a 40% three-point shot. And sometimes that's juiced up by transition, but the Wolves don't play transition. Ask yourself, do you think Julius Randle is a 60% two-point guy or a 40% three-point guy or anything anywhere near that? No. So as long as you are handing him heavy usage, there is not going to be a strong delta between what he is producing and what the average of the league is. It's probably actually going to be negative. And it's the same thing with Rudy on the other side of the floor. It doesn't mean he's not a great defender, but the overall impact of what Rudy does in 2025 versus 2019 is different because the game is changing. And there are fewer teams that Rudy can sit and drop and shut your team down defensively. That's just a fact. And that's why we saw awesome games from Rudy last week. When he played the Pelicans and guarded Yves Missi, he could sit and drop the whole time. Or against the Magic last week when he was guarding Goga Bitadze, could sit and drop the whole time. Rudy's nasty there. The problem is not a lot of teams play that way. So over the course of 82 games, you're going to have like 15 of those good games from Rudy where he's able to rack them up like that. Or Julius is going to have 15 games where he's guarded by a mediocre guy and he's able to get buckets the whole time. And you're like, whoa, Julius, 36 points on 21 shots. That's great. The game is changing in a way that I just do not understand the focus and the prioritization when you have alternatives on your bench of guys who, at least in my head, line up in playing the way that the game is being played today. I could see Dante DiVincenzo on the good teams in the league. I could see Nickeil Alexander-Walker on the good teams in the league. And I just said I could see Naz Reid because they are willing to play a way around a star player that is going to be more productive in the aggregate and certainly over the course of time because he's younger. I don't get, if we do get to 56 games and the justification we hear is, oh yeah, we had to move on from this player because we gave Julius Randle an extension. That why? What is it like? What is your plan for the future here? How are you going to get as good as the good teams when Rudy doesn't have the impact that he had previously because the game is changing and because he's gotten a little bit older, and Julius doesn't have the same impact on the game that he had 5 years ago because the game is changing and he's getting a little bit older. Like, those are the facts of where the NBA is at and where this team is at going into the 2025 trade deadline. If that's not considered, I don't get it. I won't. It doesn't seem like that receives proper consideration right now. Let's see where we're at, in 17 months.
Well, and again, I mean, in defense of Tim Connelly, in this particular case, he has always kept his cards really close to the vest. And the next thing you know, you got Mike Conley and Nickeil Alexander-Walker for D'Lo, or you get Monte Morris for, whatever, chicken feed. And so, he got rid of Shake Milton and Troy Brown Jr. Like, I made a mistake. All right, they're off the roster. And I also think he knows hoops, and I think that he is aware of what you're talking about. I do think that there is a strong Gobert loyalty in the front office. Dell Demps, I know, is a big Gobert guy. And I think that Conley is and Gobert, let's fake it, and he whether you like or dislike the extension, he shaved $10 million off next year's cap
12
to take the 12. That's an important, that's a little bit more than a mid-level guy right there. So all those reasons, but more importantly, there was a great story in your whole rant there, which, by the way, I really enjoyed. I agree with 98% of it about the game changing. There was a really good article in The Athletic that was done by the beat writers of the Wolves, John Krasinski, and the Pelicans, Guillory. I can't remember his first name.
Will. Yep.
Will.
All right.
About how Brandon Ingram and Julius Randle how do they fit? They don't really fit. Are they tradable? Well, not really. And one of the reasons they're not really tradable is because they don't fit exactly kind of the context you're talking about. Ingram is obviously a wonderful scorer, but he's mostly a mid-range scorer. And he's not put it this way, they don't fit because the salaries that they're likely to want to command are not realistic. Brandon Ingram is not a max guy. He just isn't.
Right.
And Julius Randle is not a $40 million guy. He just isn't, not in this NBA. 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, both of those people had better value. And it was not just because they were younger. It was because the game fit them better.
Dude, literally just think about like 2005. I think about this sometimes with the Wolves team. This Wolves team would totally fit that. You got this elite rim protector. You got a burly power forward, right? Who could like, is kind of like could hurt you at all 3 levels to some extent. You got the classic like 2 guard. It's the Kobe, it's the Ant, right? You got the classic point guard, Mike Conley, you know, at the 1 and the Bruce Bowen perimeter defender and Jaden McDaniels. It's this team was created in a lab in like 2005. And surprise, surprise, you're 22nd in offensive efficiency, you know, like that's, I mean, that's
and yet elite defensively because you can, because defense it'll always be sweat equity and fly around, you know, regardless, but, and height in this particular case. But
they know these things though. Like, I mean, like
exactly. That's where I come back to. I mean,
and that's where I'm like, what the hell? Like,
right. Well, I mean, it stands to reason that if you traded Karl Anthony Towns, it was because you saw the numbers heading off into the future that were going to be crippling in terms of your ability to operate.
Because Karl Anthony Towns is not just like Brandon Ingram isn't a max player, Julius Randle isn't a $40 million player. Like they didn't believe Karl Anthony. 60 million, you know, and that's
60 million. That's superstar money, you know, and there are cat defenders out there that will say, you know,
and maybe he's playing like a superstar there. So he's
a candidate for MVP and all sorts of stuff. Fine. But I will say that let's see how that contract ages, you know, but I'm not going to get into the whole cat.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, that's all right. Because my point is, if you did not have Naz Reid, then trading Cat would have been stupid because you have 80% of Cat for 30% of the money. And so, maybe it'll get boosted up to 60% of the money, but that's still you don't know where Naz's ceiling is yet. You have a pretty good idea where Cat's ceiling is. You have a very good idea where Randall's ceiling is. And
do we know that Naz is 80% of Cat, or is Naz's ceiling 80% of Cat?
No, I think that we absolutely know that somebody who makes quick decisions with the ball, has the handle of Naz Reid, has the chase down capability on defense, can guard 2 through 4 really capably.
Give a shit factor.
Is a 3-point threat, gets to the rim, hits from the corner and above the break, flies around, is unselfish with the ball, very, very rarely shoots a mid-range, if at all. I mean, no.
Yep.
I would say that's 80% of Karl Anthony Towns.
I'm just saying 80% of listeners went, what? 80%? You know, like they're like, it's
hey, I'm the guy who was ripping Naz Reid for the first 3 or 4 years of his career.
That is true.
I know all the warts in Naz's game. And I will tell you, I like to be right. So I was watching carefully. And he proved me wrong. The things that I thought Naz could not measure up on, he has measured up. Now, as we just got through talking about, what hasn't been tested yet and what may be crucial, and is quite frankly, one of the reasons Cat gets downgraded, is how do you do when the lights are brightest and the pressure cooker is whistling? You know, that is when you find out whether a guy is a $60 million player or not. And not that Naz is going to get to that realm, but if he could be a guy who is a credible threat to make Ant cook, then that's what you need. And if he's not, then he's still worth money and he's still worth keeping on the team simply because he is such a modern NBA player. And by the way, is 24 years old. So let's not, assume that Nas is what he is yet. But that is what needs to be found out. And that does not hurt your current championship chase, I think, because you don't give him the role. You say that role is there for people to earn.
Right. I like that. And I just want to turn off of Nas for a second because we don't have a lot more time.
Yeah.
But I think we had that's how I wanted that conversation to go about, like, what are these last 17 games before the trade deadline? What are we trying to learn? What can we learn in this chapter that should help define what to do at the trade deadline? And obviously the Julius and Nas one is the main one people are going to look at there. There is also, and we'll go through these, I think, a little bit more quickly, the Rudy, Jaden, and Nikhil element of it. Like, if you're at all sitting in there, and I'm not saying they are, I don't think they are, but if you're at all sitting in there thinking about, hey, maybe like Rudy was important to us and we wanted to play this, this sort of way, but we're realizing our roster is going, in a different direction. If that hint of your mind of like, you want to stop playing Ant next to a 7-2 guy that clogs the paint, like, what can you learn over this course of time to really iron out, is that the right decision or not to let go of Rudy and so as to empower something else to be able to happen? And then I would go down the same, we know the ways that Jaden empowers Ant with his defense, but also in ways holds him back from not being a spacing threat, which hurts Ant spacing the team overall. Nikhil's a tough one. I'm not really sure how he holds you back in any sort of way, given what his role is. But I think, that would be when we really blow it out. We talk about, like, as I think we will in the next few weeks, like trades that would really hurt, but maybe should be considered or will be considered, I think would be to those three guys. So what are you looking for in these next 15 to 17 games to iron out if you're Tim Conley, iron out these opinions and decide how much you want to consider even putting them on the market?
I think that Rudy is untradeable for value. I think that you could get off him, but I do not think you'll get close to the value that you need. You have said it more than I have, but we both agree that the value of Rudy Gobert is a daily thing. And it is also an accountability thing, a communications thing. He is a leader in a weird way. He's like the parent you don't like, but the discipline helps. It's like, you want to be able to say, my dad sucks or something. At the same time, your dad is helping you grow up in a good way,
He's putting that food on the table. Yeah.
Exactly. And so the fan base that gets Rudy Gobert in any trade is not going to like it. No. And that is a consideration for any team making a move that regards that big of a number next to his name at this point in his career. And you're just very eloquent rant of how he isn't fitting into the modern game. So I don't think he's tradable for value.
So, certainly not for the value that you purchased him at. I mean, it's at a lower number. I do think some teams that are committed to playing that type of center, and they already know that that's their identity, and it kind of works, like the Mavs, right? I mean, they have two good approximations, but I think we can all picture that. We could picture if randomly, Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford disappeared, how Rudy Gobert could be helpful to the Dallas Mavericks.
Right. But I put this to you, as you and I both Gobert fans. Mm-hmm. Would you take Lively and Gafford for Gobert straight up right now?
No.
I sign, right?
Yeah. Of course. I'm just saying, I do think there are some teams that Rudy Gobert could be attractive and helpful to, particularly at a salary number next season that's 35 and not the 47.
Okay, and so what $35 million are they going to give you that will satisfy the Wolves and not diminish their team enough to have that? See, I mean, again, I'm not saying that Gobert is worthless. I'm saying that a team,
valueless.
Yeah, you are not going to get what Gobert gives you. You are not going to get back, and part of that is the narrative out there on him is incredibly toxic for a lot of bad reasons and a couple of minor good reasons.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to Jaden McDaniels, that fits into the Tim Connolly's got big balls conversation, which he has indicated, trading Cat, trading for Gobert. I think that if there is a deal out there that makes sense, Jaden is a certified all-NBA defender right now, and still has a lot of intriguing potential, still young, and is certainly a D guy. The 3 remains in smaller letters or numbers, but there is a place getting a $28 million back that is a better fit. And I tweeted this out before. If you're trading Jaden McDaniels, you have a long conversation with Ant before it happens, because you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and Ant is the baby there. If basically you get rid of Jaden McDaniels to improve your team, and Anthony Edwards says, that's my dude,
right,
I'm gone, then that's a bad trade.
Yeah.
But I do think that I think the Wolves would listen. I don't think they would say anything about it to anybody, but I think that they would listen to any offers for McDaniels, and they would consider what they get back. The reason I say that is because the first benefit, it's like Cat. You lose Cat, okay, that's because you have Nas. You lose McDaniels, okay, that's because you have Na and DDV. It isn't 100%. It might be 80% again, what we're talking about. But you have a situation where you could put both those guys on the court together. DDV and Na have proven, that they give you a certain kind of defensive intensity. And I say this as somebody who I wrote a laudatory column on, McDaniels in the middle of his first and probably only boomlet thus far this year, out of the hope and the respect that the guy, he's kind of been baited and switched by all this lineup stuff too. But I also think, I'm on record as saying I thought last year he was overrated defensively. I thought 2 years ago he was fantastic. And I think that he has, as I said earlier, these last 20 games or 25 games or whatever, I think he's back to being a very, very good on-ball defender who has also proven he can be valuable off the ball as a rebounder and rotator, a great low man, has size. He is much more of a 3-4 than he was last year. And I think that could be exploited. So I don't want to trade Jaden McDaniels, but I think that if there is something out there that really works for both teams and Ann is okay with it, it gives you the kind of, that's why you pose the question, are there ways to go from third to fourth gear with this team as we come down the stretch toward playoffs? I think Conley would listen.
Yeah. So I want to start with I think Conley would listen part, and why to me that would logically make sense is because, like I was saying with Gobert, I think there's a limited market of teams that would even be interested in a 7'2" center who's, plays one specific way, right? There'd be
right.
So the market shrinks there, which theoretically means, fewer offers, less intrigue. Is also 32. It just trims, right? Like where the Gobert return probably isn't what you would want it to be for market factors. Well, Jaden has like all these positive market factors,
right?
And he did just win all defensive team. He's kind of, because he's 24, he's also kind of the guy that a bad team would trade for. or like a team that's like, hey, we're going to be good like in a year or two, or maybe even next season, but we're going to go get him now. I think there would be a wider market of teams who would be interested in acquiring that, particularly when they see that he's 24 years old, that he's in year one of a 5-year contract. Like, even if you are the Utah Jazz or the Wizards or something like
Good
that,
point.
you're like, well, we don't really know what we're going to be in a year and a half, but like 98% sure Jaden McDaniels will figure that out. Like, you know, with him in there around it. I guess if you're those teams, you would just ask yourself, are we going to have the surrounding personnel to, if Jaden is on our team in 2 years, do we have enough shooting around him? Because look, in Minnesota, like, it's kind of been some issues with Gobert and McDaniels when they share the floor together, both not as, you know, high level shooters. But I still think there's a lot of teams you could get out there that could convince themselves that they'd be interested to make a decent offer for Jaden McDaniels. So that's how I would think the market would play out in that sort of way. So then I go to Finch and Conley, and I think about these next 17 games where you're like, hey, we might be getting some offers for Jaden in a month. Like, what do I want to learn? What different ways can I try him here to see, you know, what the ceiling of what Jaden could be on the Wolves is? Like, you know, rip the parachute, like let him spread his wings a little bit more, try things with them, you know, you haven't done before. I think this is like, I was called a spade. They're 21-18 right now. Like, this team isn't going to the finals. Like, I don't think you need to operate with the precision of every single matchup, and rotation is about, like, honestly, like, winning the game in front of you. Like, we've gotten to the point of the season where ulterior motives should be considered. It's the same reason why, like, Rob Dillingham in the second half of the season, like, you at least got to consider that a little bit more than he did the first half of the season. Because you're not as good as you thought you were, right? Like, and you're probably going to be a play-in team, or probably not going to be a team hosting a first round playoff series. So that's what I would say with, like, Jaden and Nickeil too. Like, use these 17 games to understand what Nickeil Alexander-Walker or Jaden McDaniels are going to be with your team going forward. Because if you're not trading for them, you're probably committing to them, you know, to the long haul, whether that be through committing to Jaden and being like, hey, we're going to make it work, this Jaden and Ant pair. We know there's some shooting limitations here, but we're committed to that. We're not trading him. Or we're re-signing Nickeil Alexander-Walker. We're, like, committing to that, and that's going to probably cost us elsewhere, but we know it's important. Like, get yourself in a position to know what you want to commit to. And I think you get that in this third chapter of the season, if you're Finch, by being a little bit more, I don't even know what the word would be, that, right? Like, just a little bit more, like, toying around a little bit more, but a little bit more aggressive of seeing what the ceiling can be of some players that you haven't been maybe examining as closely because you've been preoccupied with Julius Randle or Ant navigating 2 on the ball, or whatever it might be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And this is, especially if you're talking about taking a more middle view rather than an immediate view of the team, I think one of the things that's important right now is to find out how hollow or potentially substantive McDaniels' offense can be. I looked up his numbers as a pick and roll ball handler. His points per player is actually very high, but it's like obviously very
12
small
possessions. Yeah.
Well, no, except that it's enough to figure in on the on the NBA stat sheet. So, but anyway, that was something I thought, and it kind of makes sense if you think about it. I see him dish off the dribble, pretty well, and then the other thing is, and this is pie in the sky, puppies and rainbows probably, but if McDaniels was hitting 38% of his threes right now, think of the difference in this team's offense.
Sure.
I mean, it would be an extra 4 points a game.
And the impact on the spacing would be cascading because it's now, I mean, just turn the game on tonight and hit pause in a possession when Ant has it up top and the starters are in. Look where Jaden's guy is standing.
Right.
Look where Rudy's guy isn't standing. You know, it's just, Anyways, continue.
And so if he hits shots on a continuous basis, and what I would do is just try it. Basically say, Jaden, let it rip, and also, off the bounce, run some plays, especially if he's got somebody on him.
We're saying something similar in that we're saying do something. Those are not the things I would do. What I would experiment more is as a cutter, as a screener. I would start playing him more as a 4, and you're like having him do more bigger guy stuff. And you're having really good more stuff too. Stuff.
It's funny you mentioned that because I did look at I looked at play types this year versus last year.
Okay.
And on cuts, the Wolves were 23rd last year in frequency. They're 24th this year. I mean, they don't cut.
Right.
They were 24th in points per play last year. They're 13th this year. And the reason that matters is because 24th on cuts was 1.27 points per play, and 13th is 1.33, which is great, efficient offense.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons that Memphis has come to the fore as an offensive force isn't because of Ja, because Ja's been hurt, but they are not doing the dribble handoffs and screens all the time. They own the Wolves with cuts to the rim, especially from these angular cuts across the baseline in the paint once they drew people out to the corners and out to the perimeter. And they were doing multiple cuts. They were sending somebody, and when somebody chased the first cutter, they came in from behind with another cut, and it was wide open. These are the kinds of things that McDaniels could do. Finch invariably says McDaniels is a great cutter.
Yeah.
And invariably said, why aren't we hitting Ant on cuts, and why isn't Ant cutting baseline more often? How many times has Ant cut baseline? Then you ask yourself, who does he have to run over to do that?
Yeah.
He has to run over Gobert and or Randall. So, but again,
I mean, I like what we're
these are low hanging fruit.
Yeah, and it's the interesting way to shake the most of the low hanging fruit out of the tree so you could grab it and bite it and taste it is to do a pretty broad shift in style of play. Right. Again, over this last chapter, again, if you're trying to figure out what the fruit tastes like before the trade deadline, shake the tree some, try and figure out some different answers to or get a better understanding of what each of these players are and can be in the context of this team, in the context of the team going forward. And I would note the tree shaking might have already started.
Right.
And that might have been the starting line.
DDV, right.
Yes.
Because he likes to cut and hit cutters. In fact, one of his problems with turnovers, quite frankly, is he will hit a cutter even if the guy is totally covered.
Right.
He just loves the idea.
No.
Conley has better discretion when it comes to cutters.
Right.
And now that he's on that second unit with Nas and Nah doesn't cut enough, by the way. I think part of it is his size. He's harder to hit. But
not a great finisher. Yeah. No, not a great finisher.
When he is a great finisher is when he does it himself, though.
Mm-hmm.
At least once every 2 games or 2 times every 3 games or whatever, he'll weave through 3 people and put a ridiculous angle banker off the rim. Now, I agree with you that he also gets his shot blocked almost casually sometimes when he misjudges those things.
I think I just stumbled into a tinfoil hat situation where because I think we talked this through, and of the logic, if you are Tim Conley, of wanting to better understand some different things before you're considering making a big move, would be, all right, hey, Chris Finch, you've been playing the same starters and the same rotation, same everything for basically the first 35 games of the season.
Yep, and you're 3 games over 500.
And after that 35th game of the season, Finch said, if I thought changing the starting lineup was the magic bullet, I would have done it by now. He proceeds in the 48 hours after that comment, less than 48 hours,
right,
to change the starting lineup.
And it was a pretty good bullet.
And put Dante DiVincenzo in there. My point is less so of like if it worked or not. It's like that would make sense if I was Tim Conley to go to Chris Finch and be like, can we try something else different here for these, like a similar but different for these last 20 games, so we can get a better idea of what Dante is, because because otherwise teams will offer us all this for him. Like, let's better understand what he can be for our team. Or should we consider trading him, or trying Julius in this group or Mike in that group? Like, it would make sense to try and influence your coach over the last 20 games prior to the deadline to play a little bit of a different way so you could gather more information.
And Conley is loath. They talk all the time, but he is loath to get into Finch's business and doesn't want Finch to be in his business, but they collaborate.
Right.
I think that it would go exactly the way you're talking about it, in that we got a trade deadline coming up. We are underperforming expectations. I don't want to make a move unless I have more evidence of what we have. That would be something. Yeah. That would be something where both of those guys would understand that their mutual understanding of each other's jobs and their steadfast support for each other, both of which, by the way, have really solidified and stabilized this Wolves organization. For better or for worse, you could say they're underperforming this year, but every other year but last year, 21-18 would be a happy-go-lucky Wolves fan base right now. The bar got set high, and rightfully so. The bar stayed high after the offseason they had and the payroll that they have. But now is the time, in my view, to see, and not for nothing, we've got a very, very recent example. Dallas made it to the NBA Finals because they pulled the trigger on some trades that brought in a totally new philosophy as well as fresh personnel around their
the
core
way
people.
That they played. Yeah, that's a good way to it's a good way to put it. Yeah, and these are just the things. That's the job, I think, if you are a president of basketball operations, is to be weighing and influencing where you can and gathering understanding. And when you're faced with big decisions, it's about how much information can we get. And I know they've been gathering it organically, the ways they always do. But yeah, they're probably in a position where they're drilling down on the trade deadline a little bit more, better understanding what their players' values are, what the cost will be elsewhere. It makes sense. And that they're considering. Okay.
Another thing to really reinforce here is the Cat trade settled nothing, and it was never meant to settle it.
Yeah.
You have two guys with player options next year, Julius Randle and Naz Reid. There were going to be other shoes falling, if not in February, in July, and it was going to happen. You did not have an ongoing plan of Randle and Naz on your roster in 2026. That isn't going to happen. Other big changes are necessary in order to make this Cat trade make sense. That was the first half of it, the Cat trade. The second half of it is sorting out what you now have a chance to sort out because of the Cat trade. If you didn't want to do that, then the Cat trade is ridiculous.
Yeah. So let's see how they sort it out.
Exactly.
And let's take these
on the court
games
and in the front office.
Well, because those should inform each other, and then you should hope that the coach and the president of basketball operations have the type of relationship that we understand it to be, that you're actually having, some real conversations. So it's not a Tim Conley in Denver situation where he's having to trade players so Mike Malone stops playing them, and we don't want it to be that type of situation. I do think it is as I understand it, a situation where they are communicative together and want to.
Well, I certainly put forth a credible united front.
Yeah,
Nothing is ever said about the other one that isn't couched in, plaudits. Hey,
and the background, checks out too. Conley came in here, didn't hire a new coach. Interest the coach before he got here.
Right.
Like that in of itself is a strong indication. But we got to go. This was fun. I always like taking stock of this team. 40 games in, I didn't really know we were going to get as much into the trade deadline stuff as we did, but we're slowly like rolling out precursors.
Well, what we did is we went the current 20 and then the next 20.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. And the next 20 is going to be interesting from a basketball standpoint in that it is going to inform the decisions of the trade deadline. So we'll see how that starts out tonight with game 40 against the Golden State Warriors. It's a late tip, so maybe you are able to listen to this before that game starts. Just for listeners, for the plan for the rest of the week, Britt was writing on Thursday morning. I'm flying to New York on Thursday morning, so we bumped this up to Wednesday. So there will not be a podcast off of the Warriors game on Thursday. The next episode will be Friday night, late after the game. Kyle and I are going to record on what goes down in Wolves Knicks at Madison Square Garden on Friday night. So again, if this 90-minute pod with Britt is your pod until the Knicks game, nothing coming off of this Warriors game, even if something crazy happens, just did not fit the schedule this week. But I'm excited to be in New York, see these Wolves play the Knicks again. And Britt, I appreciate you.
Sure.
Appreciate you coming on. You're writing tomorrow morning, right?
I am. Yeah, it'll probably be along the lines of the fact that the Wolves have totally changed their offense and remains the same, and in terms of efficiency, and so that's an interesting way to get into what happens with the offense and why. But at this point, I don't know. It'll happen around 3 a.m. I'll figure out what I'm doing.
It's crazy. It's a late one tonight too.
I know, it's weird.
He's Britt Robson. You follow him on Twitter at Britt Robson. Follow him on Blue Sky as well, and at Min Post. His weekly column comes out, and you can find that probably Thursday afternoon of this week. Again, next up on the pod is Kyle and I. Until then, he's Britt. I'm Dane. Peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Green and hot so you can find me in the crowd, yeah.